All right, welcome to the first edition of the DREP Book Club. This is the 7th edition of the Leadership Academy Book Club. We've run 6 previous book clubs. Now we're focusing for the next 4 on DREP stuff. When you sign up to be a DREP, you get a welcome email. And in that email, IOG recommends 4 books that DREPs could read to get more familiar with the process and also to look at different methods of building community and collaboration and things like that. So this book club was really formed to lean into those 4 recommendations and allow people to really have the kind of incentive to read and then a space to discuss and talk about the books and any thoughts or ideas that are coming up. Today, we're going to kick off with talking about the IOG paper that kicked off everything. It's titled, hold on, let me make sure I get the full, A Treasury System for Cryptocurrencies, Enabling Better Collaborative Intelligence. It's a long title. It's a dense paper full of math. So I thought this is going to be a really interesting kind of book club. I had to really dive in and kind of overcome my fear of the math and not just see the math. So once you read it in detail, a lot of things start to surface. So I think we'll have a fairly interesting thing here. I have prepared a Miro board. And then just some initial bookkeeping. We do have a Discord server where we discuss this book and the others that are coming up, as well as other books that the community wants to talk about. So if you're interested in discussing books and general book club stuff, join that Discord. There's a link here to the Fund 9 proposal that kind of kicked all this off. And it has a lot more details of what this book club for DREP specifically is about. And then the last link here is our Miro board. So I'm going to share that screen to kick it off. So this is the Leadership Academy Book Club, as mentioned. There's a link here to the IdeaScale thing, Miro board and Discord, just so that if you ever find your way here and don't know where these resources are, they're always here. And today, we're going to talk about a treasury system for cryptocurrencies. But just as a teaser, book 2 is called The Power of Experiments by Michael Luca and Max Bazerman. Book number 3 is Reinventing Organizations by Frederick Laloux. And then book number 4 is Reinventing Discovery by Michael Nielsen. So those are the upcoming books, but today we're going to focus on the white paper. So in the corner here, I actually dropped the white paper itself. So if you haven't read it, you can link to it. You can click this little arrow here for source and it'll jump you out to the actual paper. And you can actually read it in line since Miro loads everything up. So you can dive in if that's of interest. Just as a starting point, let me get everything set up here. If people want to raise their hands or give some kind of emoji, how many people have actually read this paper in depth? I'm curious. We usually get a number of people that have read it, some people that haven't.
Everything but the math.
Everything but the math.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have a few people that have read everything, some just not the math like me. Other people haven't read it yet. So we have a mix. That's good. So part of this book club is also just to introduce the paper and the high level concepts and the discussions around it. So you don't have to have read the paper to participate. So to kick it off, I like to start these with I tried to break the paper into 3 general kind of high level areas. That helps me think about it in some kind of detail. And it talks about the introduction is kind of all around collaborative decision making. And then it jumps into the treasury system. And in there, kind of, it outlines some entities within the treasury systems and some other details around it. And then it goes into a proposed voting scheme. So those were the kind of the 3 high level areas. So I wanted to start with this first one on collaborative decision making. So the why of the paper is kind of how do we get to better decision making and better collaborative intelligence. And it starts to outline some of the ways it's been done in the past. And it really talks about liquid democracy as kind of the space that this paper is experimenting in. And as part of that, it's also talking about plutocratic voting as opposed to one person, one vote, or other forms of voting. And basically at a very, very high level, liquid democracy is anybody who has the token can either vote directly for a proposal or delegate their votes to someone else who has registered as an expert, in this case, the DREPs. And then either the DREPs or the people directly can cast their votes for a proposal. And I think that in itself is fairly interesting. Oh, and just as another book kind of housekeeping, I pre-populated a bunch of sticky notes. These aren't meant to be used by me. If you want to take notes, if you want to write down the conversation that happens here, feel free to jump in and add anything you want here. And also on the bottom of this is a space for resource shares or links. So if you have anything that you want to share as a link or a resource that can add to the conversation or help people that come here afterwards, feel free to drop stuff in here. And just at a really high level, I dropped in one of the KIPs that relates to this. QADAO did a series of meetings and a paper around delegated representation in Cardano's project Catalyst Governance, which is all around this paper as well. IOG's blog introducing the concept, and then some general links to what liquid democracy is, so you can take a look at those. And then I thought this was interesting. I found a contribution to the critique of liquid democracy. So this is a critical paper about liquid democracy and might be of interest to people if you want to see some counter arguments. But that said, I guess I'll pause here and open it up. What do people think about the general high level concept of liquid democracy and plutocratic voting as the proposal for this?
I think like this is the first time in history we were able to really try out this way of voting, because it requires a very efficient voting system to be able to do this delegation of voting and to do it in a private way. So for me, that in itself is a why. Like, this hasn't really been tried on such a scale before, so it should be tried because it could be a much better way of voting than we have done before. So yeah, just that alone is a why for me.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I agree. It's interesting that we have the technology and the reason to actually do these experiments. In the paper, they talked a little bit about, in the beginning, there was Bitcoin, and Bitcoin doesn't have any kind of formal governance kind of structure or a way to create a treasury to pay for development. So having, and this will be the next kind of section, is the treasury system, is pairing that with a treasury and a mechanism to fund development, and pairing that with a decision-making process on how to spend that treasury to develop the ecosystem, I think is kind of a really, especially unique kind of place where we're at. And one can envision, like, way off in the future, maybe this is how we run cities or local governments or even nation state, kind of where you're collecting taxes and you have this treasury and we have to decide what's the most efficient way to spend this money rather than the current bureaucratic systems that we have in place. So
Dan has a good comment as well in the chat, like, and I guess it's also about scaling. Like, in modern systems, like, the information you can get is so huge that sometimes you need to delegate because you can't be an expert on every topic. So this is also a reason why, like, you need a voting system that is able to handle such a large amount of voting, because for example, in treasuries, you could have hundreds of projects. And we have seen this already, that it's very hard to get an overview of everything. So we need some type of system that's able to digest all of this information, and the only way to do that is to break it up into to different parts, that some can be good at one segment, like you have DREPs looking at one type of project, for example, and then you as a voter can instead focus on learning about these representatives instead of having to read 200, 300, 400,000 projects. So Dan says it much more elegantly in the chat, like it all comes down to how high information acquisition costs are and how self-sovereign individual humans agents within the system are. And that last point is also something I feel is important when we discuss liquid democracies. Is you can have as great a system you want, but you also need to make sure that it has a high degree of participation, and also a high degree of it's easy to access it and to be a part of such a system. So, for example, the UA redesign that they're doing now for DIRPs, that's actually very important. That's important because, for example, how do you show the different DREPs? How do you present this information? It's the same question as you have when you vote directly as well. Like, you need to make sure that you present it in a way that the voter can efficiently be able to make good decisions, because that's in the end what voting really is trying to make efficient decisions, at least for me.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks for that share. And thanks for that text in the chat, Dan. Do you want to expand on that any?
Hi guys.
Hey Dan.
I just had a pacifier in my mouth. I'm holding the little one right now. Good to see you. Yeah, I can expand a bit on it in a way that I read about liquid democracy, I think 5-6 years back when they had when they tried it out in Germany, and they had a bit disappointing participation, and that was the reason why it didn't take on. Because if you have, as mentioned, a high cost of information acquisition, and plus individuals that don't really care about self-sovereignty of decisions of data, then this is a mix where you cannot have liquid democracy work in a way that is contributing positively to the overall network. And yeah, I love the idea. I love that we are exploring it. It's better than the Wild West that we have now. However, we have to be cautious about it and really see it as a stepping stone and not something that we should by default think that this is the solution that we're going to go by, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Thanks for that, man. And I think the comment about allowing us to scale as well is important. Like, I think somewhere around Fund 7-8, we kind of crossed that threshold where before that one could spend the time and read every proposal in a fair amount of detail and actually cast votes. But I found that in Fund 8, when I tried to do that, it took me like 2 full weeks of effort to just get in there and really commit and try to do it. And then Fund 9, I gave up. I just had to focus on certain challenge categories or areas where I felt comfortable. And so for me, the whole process broke down at that point. There were too many proposals. And if this community grows by 10x over the next year or two, then that's even a greater. Like, there's no way any one person can go and look at all the proposals and vote on things. So I think this is a needed experiment, but I agree it should be treated as an experiment, and kind of where do we go? I'm interested in what are the feedback mechanisms and how do we actually reflect on the process and how well it went as a community, and how do we direct its evolution, because that part of it isn't in the paper. It's more of a proposal. This is what we should do. So that might be an interesting topic to get into as well.
Absolutely, 100%. You just read my mind. It's all about how how do we process the data that we collect now that we actually engage with these DREP system in a way that makes sense. So, for example, do we have any mechanism in place to collect feedback on individual DREPs, not only after the voting, but also like after a year, once have the milestones been hit of the project proposals that the DREPs have voted on, and like how do we think about that? And I had another idea some months back about further gamifying this DREP system, even where this would automatically be calculated in the incentive mechanism of the system. So in a sense, DREPs would only be paid out if their quote unquote bet on the correct proposals in along the line paid out. So if the proposals actually finished and created impact, and then only would the DREP receive their incentive, and this incentive would also flow back to the people that trusted in the DREP. It's a kind of a prediction market situation where the DREP sheets or the voting ballots are the bets, quote unquote, and other people can buy into those bets or bet against those bets. And this would create a whole new economy around this DREP situation. Highly gameable, but also very interesting, I think. Sorry for rambling.
No, thank you for that. I think that's actually a fascinating topic about using market dynamics. You call them bets, but that to actually make collaborative decisions. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting topic that may contribute highly to this space. Simon, your hand is up. We can't hear you if you're saying anything. Still can't hear.
Okay. It's saying sorry, 1 minute.
Okay.
While we wait, I also think about how do these representatives form, and also the moment you become a representative, you're not only voting for yourself, you start to think about ethics, like, because you're not only voting for yourself, you're voting on behalf of others. Should you be able to vote on projects you are involved in yourself, and all kinds of ethical questions.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing I will mention is like how currently it's very like tedious to become a DREP. You have to go through a very formal structure, and there's lots of theories about like very efficient leadership in the new century is more about organic growth of who will become the leader in different type of situations, and how do we facilitate like the best representative on a given question if this representative to become a representative is very tedious and formal to do. Like the whole process of becoming a representative is a question in itself. Like, how do we deal with that?
Mm-hmm. Those are really good questions. Jonathan.
If I may,
yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Awesome.
Great. I was curious. You said in Fund 9, the system kind of broke down for you because you couldn't, vote on all the different proposals. I feel like that might not be really a problem because you got your interest, you got maybe your 3 or 7 or however many challenges you're interested in, and if you vote on those, that's kind of fine, isn't it? Or I don't know, what are your thoughts on that, Nor why do you think it broke down for you? Just
For me personally, it was, yeah, before I was able to go through and at least glance at every proposal and kind of get a feel, because I think if you focus on one challenge category, at least for me, there's an opportunity missed of supporting a really great project somewhere else that you didn't look. And I guess it's just kind of that civic duty to participate and cast my vote. And if I'm not in certain challenge categories, I don't know, it feels a little weird for me. But other people might be totally fine, like just focusing on the areas that they're super interested in.
I feel like there's kind of a correlation, because when you're interested in something, you're more likely to be an expert or be better informed. So if you're just voting on the things that you're interested in, wouldn't that be a good thing? And yeah, I'm honestly myself, I'm a bit of a skeptic of the DREPs. I mean, I think it's fine. We experiment with it, of course. I think it's an interesting experiment for sure. But I also fear that people, I mean, once you delegate it to some person, we all know there's some people who just forget about it, and it's, I don't know, 3 years of time they might see, oh, I registered to that person, maybe I should change, but then they still don't do it, maybe, you know. Yeah, so that is kind of what I fear about the system. But yeah, I mean, that's just my opinion.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Could we call it like voter stagnation? If you just delegate it, like we see some staking pool just have delegation and they don't move it. But maybe there's solutions to that. Like, for example, you have to redelegate each epoch or each time you vote and stuff like that. So that will be really interesting.
That's a good one.
Jonathan?
Going back to what Dan was saying about some feedback loop from market performance, and it always, I think about that quite a lot. But and I always come back to, well, what are we trying to get to? Like, are we creating an innovation fund where it's the new ideas, the radical ideas, the ones that break convention and actually drive us forward to the edges, or is it an improvement on what we've already got? And to date, I've sort of always classed Catalyst as, we're looking at an innovation fund. We're trying to encourage experimentation, and the eagerness or the capacity for failing has to be in that significantly. And so if your DREPs are then wielding a great deal of vote power around performance, and their decision making maybe becomes about, okay, I've got to pick the ones that have got the most economic outcomes or the most impact, then they're perhaps ignoring the innovators and the small voices that have got the weird ideas, and and so then it's like, okay, well, maybe we break the community in two. So we have our innovation fund, which is perhaps smaller and more experimental, and we have the larger pot to do with just making sure that we've got the bases covered of keeping sustainability and viability, infrastructure all covered, things like that. But then we have an innovation fund that's smaller, that DREP's voting power is all to do with actual, taking a risk, and or maybe that's not DREPs, and maybe that is just individual. Let's have the wild horses section of the fund.
Interesting.
Can I comment a bit on that?
Please.
It's a great point. So in one of the books I read about this, like on group thinking, like the ideal you want is to have contrarian views. Like what would be really dangerous if you have only a few group of DREPs that control all of the voting and doesn't take any types of risk. And there's many studies on this, like you don't want to have individuals thinking alone on something. you want to have some form of interaction and the group thinking, but you don't also want to have the other side of it, where it's just a few people who amalgamates the thought of everyone else, because then you get what you say, like you get the no risk taking because you're judged only on having a good score in this market economy. So I think we need to find a middle ground where you accept some risk and you have more than a few DREPs. It has to be a volume of these DREPs for the group thinking not to become too strong on a selected few individuals. Yeah.
Yeah, and I can see that, and that sort of ties in with the stagnation ideas from Simon. That if we're ending up with pools of power all with the same mind, that groupthink can escalate quite rapidly. And like I'll vote with DREP's voting with that DREP because that's obviously I appreciate the way this mind thinks. Therefore, I'll be overtly influenced by that, even in new areas. So yeah, the whole load of risk.
I think that's a real danger to this. Like that's something they really need to consider when it's implemented.
And so, Nori, as well, what you were saying about when it just became too big for you to absorb and really analyze and process. And my mind's jumping all over. So even in this, I'm thinking there must be some application of AI that can do some of these tasks better than us, because like a DREP is really being asked to become a data cruncher, just pull in all the information from all the relevant topics and produce a set of decisions or suggestions off the back of that. And that's probably, for the scale and scope of where we're at already, is probably something that just needs some bit of machine assistance with, at least.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Like the AI applications could be like, set up a GPT-3 instance, load in all the proposals, load in your own personal preference and platform statement and beliefs, and say things like, show me the top 10 proposals that align most closely with what I think is most important. And it can probably seed you in the right direction. But I wonder if we'll miss like those really creative things that don't align or don't match, and it slips through the cracks because we're relying too much on pattern matching or AI stuff. And it's those weird off the wall ideas that could be really important that we miss through that too. So that's why I personally like to scan everything, just so I have a chance of catching something like that and going, oh, wow, I would have ignored that. But yeah, Einstein.
Maybe Simon was before me. I think he just raised his hand also.
No, go ahead, please.
Okay, this is a bit more like off the wall, but should we allow AI to be a direct representative to like categorize and to give recommendations on vote? This is a topic that's going to matter in the future, probably. So I just wanted to bring that because I just find it fascinating. Like we're moving into an era where AI will really accelerate and help decision making. Is it not then not also natural to think about how, because voting is decisions, like we should think about how does AI fit into such a decision system as well. Yeah, and I wanted to bring also a counter argument, like we say that this market economy, like to influence DREPs, that they should only vote on projects that win, that's something negative because you risk then to not vote on risky projects. But the other side of it is like we can build a reputation, and we need to have some form of building a reputation or trust, because a representative needs to build trust somehow. I think that's a good topic also to discuss. How does DREPs build trust? One way is to do this in market economy way, where you just show how efficient the vote, but maybe there are other ways to do this that we don't have the pitfalls of not voting on risky projects. I don't have the answer to that, but just wanted to bring also that topic up.
Yeah, and just jump in as well. That was one of my thought processes as well, was that actually the solution for when you can't absorb all this information is to go back to, well, I know the people involved in this proposal. therefore it's gonna get more of my vote just by my awareness of that, of the people involved. And so then that's the trust mechanic coming in and influencing the individual's power, or the DREP's power as well, or your persuasion.
Yeah.
Actually, that is kind of what Magnus said is kind of what I also wanted to talk about, because I've read this book that gave me the idea, or kind of argued about that governance and defining your own future and is what in the future might be the only thing that we really want to work on. So I saw this this forum post where it says maybe we should not give money out to votes, but maybe in the future that is the only thing that we're going to get money for, because AI is going to be so specialized in all the other things. And I mean, do we really want to give AI the power to decide our future instead of our own?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think we're ready for how fast it's evolving. It's like it hits that hockey stick and it's this exponential thing, and suddenly all sorts of cracks and holes in our society and the way we've done things kind of start to fall apart, because what was once human now doesn't necessarily have to be. I'll drop a link in chat here. Yeah, this is an article I wrote. I spent a minute trying to create a Catalyst proposal with AI, and it did surprisingly well from my perspective. And if that takes 60 seconds to do, what are we going to see in Fund 10? And it's like, are we going to see a whole flood, like tens of thousands of Chat GPT proposals being created? And yeah. But this might be a good time to move into the second section, the Treasury system. So the paper outlines a number of entities that is proposing. One is project owners or proposers who submit proposals for funding. There's a voting committee that is randomly selected from registered voters that put themselves forward to be on a voting committee. There's the voters themselves, who also register, and then there's the experts. In this case, this would be the DREPs. And then one of the interesting things that maybe we'll talk about is in the paper, they had a section on partitionary budgeting. So they actually had funding categories, and they recommended setting aside specific marketing operations and kind of like the Catalyst GPS kind of categories were in the paper as a recommendation to ensure that certain categories always had sufficient funding to operate. I thought that was interesting. It went into a little bit of detail on Treasury funding, and that was funding through a kind of tax on the SPOs and the SPO rewards, as well as donations. And then the third option was actually minting new coins, which I don't think is applicable to Cardano itself. This was a more general paper, but that was interesting. And then the rewards. So they outlined a number of rewards for each of these steps. The project owners would get funded. Voting committee is rewarded for their time there. The voters and the DREPs also get rewarded in the scheme. But interestingly, the voting committee and the DREPs actually stake or lock up a certain amount of funds. And then if they're detected to be cheating or they don't fulfill their role by voting, they lose that deposit. And they only get that back plus their rewards once it successfully kind of passes everything. So there's some interesting mechanisms in that math that talk about some mechanisms around how all this would work. But yeah, but that's the high level. The Treasury system has these four entities. And today, I think the voting committee is pretty much IOG or whoever holds the Treasury keys. Project owners are the PAs. And then voters are kind of us, and then the DREPs are what we're talking about today is kind of that new thing. But Yeah, so Project Catalyst seems to be set up already to be kind of working along these lines. With the addition of DREPs, it kind of fits the paper's kind of vision for, or a proposal for how a treasury system could work. And it's interesting to kind of see the evolution of Catalyst towards this. I think this was always kind of in the back of everyone's minds at IOG. This was kind of how it would unfold. So it's interesting to see it laid out in the paper that way too. And maybe just to combine the two, also the proposed voting scheme had some phases which are fairly familiar with Project Catalyst. They had the pre-voting epoch, where projects submit their proposals, voters and experts register for the different roles. And then there's the voting epoch itself, where voters can vote directly, or, and this is the change to Catalyst, is delegate their vote to an expert. And then those experts can vote for their choice. And then the post-epoch voting is really about tallying and sending out the funds. So it works very similar to today. Tally is basically the yes minus the no votes. And then one of the details there is you have to have at least 10% of the votes voting for you to be qualified for being shortlisted. And then any other, once this yes minus no is done, then I think the threshold was 10% in the paper, and then all remaining proposals are discarded, and then the funding happens from the shortlisted projects in order of votes until the funds exhaust, which is kind of how Catalyst works today as well. And then the voting committee signs the decision, and then the funds are released. So in this case, the voting committee would take the role of IOG and make sure that the vote and tally is all good, and then all the voting committee members would sign the decision, and then it would go on chain, and that would make everything happen. But basically really close to how Catalyst works today. I think the big addition is the DREPs and possibly the voting committee, which I don't know if they're going that direction yet, but yeah, so for today, maybe we can just focus on the DREP aspect of that, since that's what we've been talking about. Yes, Eystein.
Two things I think is a bit different from the paper. The treasury system itself, in the paper, it's only proposing a few categories, but I think actually in the way Catalyst solves this by having some core categories and then also having IDs generated for new categories for the next voting period is actually superior to what is proposed in the paper. And I would like to, maybe we can discuss that part a bit also, like how do you generate categories, and is there some core categories that should remain there every voting for funding? And the other is the voting committee itself. In the paper, it's actually like a random set of the voters who have signed that they also want to be part of the committee, and they are giving a reward for being part of this committee. I think in the technical, actually now currently IOG is running this on a side chain called Jormungandr, and they do their voting there. That's why we have a snapshot, and it's moved the amount of Cardano over to this side chain on Jormungandr. So that's also interesting, like for the trust of the system, is it good that it will be forever IOG who will do this voting committee? Or maybe that is something we should also explore a bit in our thinking about it. But apart from that, I agree that the DREP is really the major addition to this, and we should also talk about that in the aspect of voting itself. Should DREPs be able to vote on their own projects and so on and so on?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think those are really good points. So I just dropped into the notes and into chat the categories that were laid down in the paper itself. We're marketing, technology adoption, development and security, support, organization and management, and kind of this general or miscellaneous category for other things that didn't fit into the other categories. And yeah, talking about categories and whether they should be, as today, voter created, or if there should be some that are always fixed would be an interesting conversation. I know in Fund 9, we saw dApps and integrations take about half of the entire fund, and leaving very little for everything else. And then as a result of that, I know that there were certain communities and projects that were impacted by that. So yeah, it's an interesting question. Should there always be space for specific types of projects, or should we follow the directive of the voters every time? And then how much does plutocratic voting actually sway that, with the big whale wallets deciding which categories get funded?
Sorry for talking so much about it, but I remember one more thing. Like, basically now we have a global vote, and that works when you have 100 to 1,000 projects you're voting on. But what about the future? Should there be some form of like regional or national type of funding, and that you can vote on that for the people who are experts or know about more about those communities? I think at one point in the future, when it gets too large, we need some form of like layered voting system. When we have 100,000 projects, just to make it an extreme example, like, how do you deal with that, even with DREPs trying to sort through all of that information? So that's also something we should maybe think about in categories. Should there also be something more about local, national, global? And yeah, and that brings me to like, are the same voting methods this good enough for all different types of categories? Yeah, but for funding in the Catalyst itself, I think it's saying it's okay to use the voting method we use currently. Sorry, my son is there. I'll just leave the video a bit.
All right, thanks for those. Yeah, what do people think? Let's start with categories then. Are categories something we should have? I know Catalyst GPS has been proposed as one scheme, and that would give us buckets and structures that are there every time. Should there be a combination of that and the current scheme of we vote on which categories every time, or should we just continue with voting on categories with each fund for the next fund? What are people's thoughts around that?
I would like to see different experiments in Catalyst, like having, yeah, maybe trying the old, I mean, we tried the old system, but maybe trying a system where we don't have DREPs and a system where we do have DREPs, and then maybe a totally different system, and we could put 1/3 into each of those different ways of funding. Yeah, that is really what I would like to see, and I think there's some people who are working on that. Isn't that right? No, the Catalyst community, the Catalyst.st community. I think they had an idea like that.
How do we facilitate this experimentation? Do we have like test nets for voting? I think it would be really cool to like lower the barrier to try to experiment with new ways of voting. Like, I know there's some tooling, for example, for the autonomous organizations, the DAOs. But what about those who don't want to form as a DAO? Like, can we have some tooling to try to experiment with voting? I think that could produce quite some interesting stuff if people were able to do that.
Mm-hmm. It would be interesting. Yeah, could that even be a proposal and like the current Catalyst to try experiments, and then or maybe a funding category in itself, and say we want $4 million, and this entire category is this new parallel experiment, or something like that. There may be ways of making it work with the current system.
I think it would be possible to have a challenge like that. I mean, if the community votes on it, right? That is what Danny always says. Just make a proposal and yeah, we can get it done.
Yeah. If someone's motivated, there's a fun 10 idea right there. Yeah. Welcome, Harsha. Good to see you. So for those that just joined, we're talking about the DREP white paper, Treasury System for Blockchains. And right now we're focusing in on we talked about liquid democracy and better decision making. Now we're kind of getting into the Treasury system and talking about DREPs a lot, but there's also some things around the funding categories that were mentioned in the paper, as well as possibly there's also the voting committee is kind of a new thing that was in there that is currently IOG, but should that be opened up to the community and other things? And the current topic is, can we do parallel experiments with the Treasury? Like do one following this paper and DREPs and all that, and another in some other way. I'm actually curious, Simon, do you have any thoughts on what other experiments we could possibly do and how that might work if it's different from the current Catalyst?
Well, just having DREPs and a normal direct way would be good. It's been a while since I've thought about this, honestly, but just having the data.
Oh God.
Can we mute him if it's a problem?
Yeah.
Hey, could you press snooze?
Cleveland, can you please mute yourself?
Press snooze. Yeah, sorry, I'm sorry, my bad.
Thanks.
All right, thank you.
I think just having the data of multiple experiments.
As soon as Quasar comes in, this happens.
Sorry, my iPhone alarm was going off. That's my bad.
It's okay. I get blamed for it.
Well, anyway, just having the data would be great, I think, from different experiments, and then see which works better on, on those different ways. Exactly. Yes. Thanks.
A parallel DREP experiment.
No, parallel catalysts, basically.
Okay, great. I mean, that would include a parallel DREP.
Well, not necessarily. Could be without DREP.
Okay, so a parallel without DREP.
Not necessarily. Just, I mean.
I got you, man. I know what you mean.
The ability to scale through parallel experiments.
To expand on that, like, could we try out quadratic voting for types of votes where it matters, like how much do you care about this topic? Because, for example, social impact, it's a voting category where quadratic voting could probably fit. But for others, it might not be such a good voting tool. And could we have like majority voting when it comes to like how we divide the funds between the categories? That's a hugely impactful thing. So maybe a more strict type of voting tool would be proper to make sure that we don't do rush changes, because also it's an economy of the companies who rely on these things. Also, they should not have quick changes. So maybe a voting tool that has more rigor is better for those. And that's just two examples out of my head, but it clearly, for me, it seems to be important to try out other voting methods as well.
Exactly. And yes, because you were asking about an example, Nori, as for the downvoting has been criticized a lot, right? And how do we know that downvoting is, maybe downvoting is a good thing, maybe it's a bad thing, but there's no data to support that?
That's a great point. We currently have what's called a fuzzy threshold logic, meaning that we decided an arbitrary 10%. You need to have at least the difference between yes and no should be 10% plus positive. How do we know that's the most efficient? We don't have, this is new. It has not been collected enough data on it. So I can completely agree with you there, Simo.
Mm-hmm. And from the
I have
chat.
a quick. Go ahead, man.
Go ahead, Harsha. I can go to the chat.
I have a quick question. What kind of data do you collect, and how do you decide what data to collect in the first place?
That is a great question. Like, how do we judge? We currently have like reporting for projects. That's a big topic in itself. But I would say like intuitively it should be different for different type of goals, like social impact categories. You need to measure it in the actual social impact. You should perhaps also, maybe the voter experience itself needs to be part of this process. Like, for example, different voting methods. What made it easiest for voters to then be able to vote efficiently? But this is a huge topic. Like it's a great question. Like, we really need to think carefully about this. What type of data will we need to measure?
Mm-hmm. But maybe also, if we lean towards transparency where it doesn't compromise privacy or anonymity, then we should have all that data available. Then people who are curious can decide which data is important on their own, and that may lead to really better results.
That's a great point. Like, how do we publicize data sets while keeping privacy? Mm-hmm. I agree. That's maybe the most sensible approach to it.
Yeah.
And also, as far as making the voting process as easy as possible, is that a good thing, or do you think there need to be barriers for people who care to actually like get through those and vote?
That's a social science topic in itself, but I think most literature is like, it's good to have voter participation as much as possible. But I could predict, like, for example, for some specific topics that you would require expert knowledge on, then maybe it could be bad to just let anyone vote without a minimal barrier that they should at least have read some information or at least know this DREP before they vote. Because yes, you could have a system where it's so easy to vote and so carefree that you have absolutely no idea what you're voting on. An example of this currently was the Daedalus Turbo incident, where people voted on something that's already getting implemented by Mithril, by IOHK, and we use quite a lot of funds for that, but it's going to end happily. But that's an example of what you're saying is. So yeah, it's a balancing act. But in general, my answer would be we should encourage voting participation, but it should be with the guarding rails that at least voters need to have enough information and actually do a proper voting on what they're voting on.
Mm-hmm. And we certainly don't want to disincentivize communities or voters that in some way through making barriers. Like, that can lead to all sorts of bad outcomes eventually if we want to have a fair, open, and equitable kind of environment.
Sorry.
Just looking at the chat, Dan posted about mixing challenge setting and categories. And examples like VC Fund has startup funds, seed funds, Series A, Series B. And could we do a combination of challenges and categories for like seed rounds Series A rounds and things. And that's also been something that's come up is Catalyst is really like a seed funding thing. And when projects grow to a certain size, they start to dominate or be very successful. And should they continue to take all the funds from all these other potentially really great projects because they're successful, like success breeds success is kind of one of those systems traps. And how do we avoid that? And we could do it through things like maximum proposal size. And then they're kind of forced to go to other sources of income like VC funding or partnerships or whatever it is to continue their growth, because Catalyst is just too small to continue that trajectory. And maybe that's where we need to be, because we don't have endless amounts of funds. Most proposals don't get funded. So it's like, yeah, those are all really interesting questions. And can we use categories and challenge settings to kind of allow that to happen or mix that up a little bit? I think that's a really good point.
That also makes me think like proposers also build reputations. How do we deal with them in the different categories? Like, should there be like an open early seed where reputation doesn't matter as much? And should reputation matter? Like, is that a good thing itself that you have these companies that have done 10, 20 successful projects, and will they stifle innovation if they dominate? So the reputation of the proposers as well is a topic.
Mm-hmm. I think that goes back to something Jonathan said earlier, is like, if you see a proposal by somebody you know and work with and like what they do, it's always like automatic, yes, I'm going to vote for them because I really love it. But is that really the best kind of way to evaluate projects? And sometimes it might be like, we want to support those that we work with and value, but again, how do we raise the voices of those that are new to the community and might have a really great idea, but just don't have the visibility or the reputation to state their case?
And importantly as well, so people who just aren't likable, like it doesn't mean that they're any less good at great ideas that can make a massive difference.
Mm-hmm. No offense taken.
Exactly.
I do think, as far as visibility is concerned, for some of the proposals that don't necessarily have like a people, like a personality that people like flow towards, I feel like the challenge teams can play a part in that. They can actually aid in helping the community understand what a specific project is about. We are trying to do a couple of experiments, but we'll see where that goes.
Interesting.
I think challenge teams are an interesting addition that's not part of the paper, but it does add another dimension to Catalyst, where each category or challenge setting is kind of shepherded and overseen by a group of people that are really passionate about it.
When we talk about reputation, I don't know if we were going to discuss other papers as well. Dr. Miela Uleriu, she works for AOHK, and she have done quite a few papers on like different types of reputation system, what already exists, and some of them also try to tackle this problem that at the start you don't have a reputation, like how would you be visible in such a system. But it could be interesting for this book club if we want to in the future also discuss add-on articles. I really liked when Nori brought on a critique of liquid democracy. I would love to also look at those type of papers as well. But that's just a general to this group. And by the way, this was fantastic. I really enjoyed getting input from you guys on this, so I would love to continue with this. And sorry if I talk too much on this, but I really am passionate about this topic.
Yeah, no, wonderful. My goal is to keep holding these on a monthly basis to give people time to read the materials and stuff. But for those who came late, there's a paper here underneath our section called A Contribution to the Critique of Liquid Democracy. So that might be an interesting paper to, because it is a kind of a critical look at liquid democracy and how it might not be the right solution for certain types of decision making. And if you have any links to Dr. Mihaela's papers, you could feel free to drop them here or join the Discord here.
Yeah,
you could create a post in the channel and people can start reading it and discussing it.
Yeah, maybe after this I will find the article and drop a link later in the Discord. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. I think we're rolling past the hour mark here now. So I would like to start kind of wrapping things up. Any final thoughts or comments on this paper? Things that we should maybe continue to discuss, things that still stood out. I really appreciated everybody's input and thoughts, and even the critiques of DREPs and those that don't believe that it's going to be a good move for Catalyst. I think having all those viewpoints is really valuable. So I appreciate everybody adding their viewpoints there.
Sorry again. One last topic is voter privacy, like the phases of voting. If we move to that, like when is a vote private? Should it be public after voting? How does that influence decision making? I'm personally, I'm leaning towards like privacy before you vote and responsibility for DREPs after you vote, but privacy for the individual voter. But it's a very, very difficult topic, really, because at the moment you don't have privacy anymore, you have all types of game theory that you could influence the vote. So, yeah.
The paper did get into that a little bit, where votes are mostly anonymous and private, but there was a clause in there, especially around the, I forget which group it was, but if there is over 50% detected fraudulent activity, then the votes are revealed so that you can see that something happened in a certain way or something. There was some language in there which I thought was really interesting. The vote was a little bit beyond me, or the math was a little bit beyond me, but I was hoping that somebody had digested that in a little bit of depth and could explain that. But yeah, I think the way DREPs are currently made, their votes are public, right? Because you're representing a group of voters. But the people who delegate to that DREP are anonymous, or at least it's just a wallet, and individual votes are still anonymous as well.
Yeah, the other side of the coin, it would be bad if you could just vote on selfishly and not be held responsible as a DREP. Just voting your own projects and nobody know because they did not have the public of your vote. So that's the other side of the coin. So I have landed on that. You should have privacy before a vote and it should be public after a vote, basically.
And what do you think of the privacy for the vote count itself? Like recently, when the circle was voted, like we were able to see how many votes each had. Do you think that has any advantages or disadvantages? Because I observed in myself that I was voting based on how many votes other people got, which I don't know if it's a good idea or not, but yeah.
That's a great topic. Like we talk about Pareto efficiency. Would you vote on what you believe is the best thing to vote on yourself if you know what everyone else is voting? Or would you vote based on what others vote because you believe then a project has a higher chance to be voted successfully? There's some damage that can be done if you know in advance what others are voting on. That's the topic of Pareto efficiency, basically. But and I'm not an expert on it either, but as far as I understand from most theorists, it's not a good thing to know in advance.
Quasar.
I don't want to change the topic or the question there, Harsha. It certainly has an impact. Everything within a system creates an effect and affects everything else. So whether you know it before or after, it still makes, this is a system that's fluid, that's moving, and everything is in motion, including information and knowledge and conviction. It depends on which side of, the vote, post-vote, pre-vote. More importantly, DREPs in the pre-quality assurance stage. What do? Like, I hope to God we're not expecting DREPs to jump in post QA stage and then just, pick 60 proposals, make a 5-minute video and vote. Because, oh yeah, by the way, you're supposed to raise 30 million ADA. How much delegation did you get? So whatever, for me, I'm looking at this and I'm saying, okay, we know there's going to be gaming. We know things are going to have an impact and effect on all of it. These are knowns. These are the easy things, right? Now, how do we actually get ourselves, the community, in position to capture the data, to find that throughout the whole process? When did these DREPs start marketing, asking for delegation? Where did they go? How did they get it? Did they work together? I'm a firm believer in DREPs working in pods, joining multi-sig treasuries, and 2 of them doing marketing, 2 of them doing proposals or whatever. These DREPs can also fill multiple roles, right? They can be proposers, they can be PAs and BPAs. So I'm going to say this from my point of view. I have done way too much and taken on too many roles and gotten involved in too much stuff in Catalyst to do a good job at it, and I've let myself and the community down. But I needed to say, what does this role do? How does it happen? What is the effect? And by doing so, it's allowed me to see, Idea Fest after proposals are submitted does no good. It does as much good as quality assurance and proposal assessing does without the proposer getting to rewrite the proposal. So I would rather delegate to a rep that is going to attack those problems as opposed to vote on proposals. Like, this is being recorded, right? Yeah, okay, so I won't use the language I wanted. We want to see 4.5 billion additional ADA come into vote because IOG wants to see that. I'd love to see it. That'd be great. Where are we going to go get 4.5 billion ADA over the course of, let's just say, 6 months? How are we going to get that in there? And how do we create this always open cycling process for new people, returners, to onboard throughout the process of Catalyst and contribute? In a democracy, in a participatory environment, it's not the voting, it's the discussion. And how do we get blockchain and crypto to incentivize having a discussion, talking about this stuff? That's where I see delegation coming into play. How challenge teams, it's a beautiful puzzle. Yes, it's all going to be gained. Everything's has an impact. I didn't vote for myself in the circle because I saw that someone else didn't have any votes. So I'm like, oh man, at least vote, like get one ADA on there. We're here to experiment, not be a pure democracy. We're not the Athenians. We're not in ancient Greece. It's still the same experiment, except now we're under major burdens of gross, aggressive capital tendencies. We've got this financial burden where now we are talking about buying boats. Well, man, we've commoditized everything. And I think that's why we're all here, is to decommoditize this shit. And that's my one cuss word for the recording.
Thanks, Quasar. Einstein, you want to go?
Yeah, wonderful by Quasar. The representation part of liquid representation, we know already a lot about. It's a liquid part that's the hard part, the hard problem. When it comes to privacy, actually causing a problem with participation, because, for example, DREPs cannot discuss in advance. I think we have to differentiate between what is your intent to vote and what is your actual vote. The actual vote itself should be private. The intent to vote, just as we have representatives today discussing what is their program, what do they believe in, what are they planning to vote, those are all fine to be public, and it's actually needed, because how else would you, if you keep everything private, you will have zero participation by others. How would you know what DREP to vote on if everything was private before the vote? So you are absolutely right, Quasar. And the hard problem is this: how do we make this system work efficiently and create enough participation? So I think if we're going to lean on something, we should risk more on this side to allow more participation. So that's why, for me, it was a very hard problem, what should be private or not. So yeah, maybe we should allow even more to be public in advance, because in the end, this gaming theory part, I don't think it will cause major effects, because everything is public and everyone is held responsible. So if someone starts to game the system, they will be held accountable.
Mm-hmm. Simon.
Yeah, I guess if I understood it right, there is the risk of being exposed and people seeing what DREPs voted on, right? If there was fraudulent behavior, or
I actually think the actual intent is for DREP votes to be public, because you're representing people's votes.
You have to make a 5-minute video of why you voted, correct? Is this true still?
I'm not sure. Maybe. They haven't actually announced. Danny in the chat said they're going to arrange workshop number 3 soon.
Hopefully,
but I think DREP votes are public, so that people who delegate know how they voted, so that you can decide whether to redelegate next time or not. I think that's a very important mechanism. They're similar to public officials who get elected. When they vote in council or on legislations, their vote is public, so you can see how your representative has voted. So individual voters are private, but DREPs are public. You're a public figure, is kind of how that's been set up, I believe.
But doesn't that open DREPs up for fraud and extortion?
Yes, certainly.
So yeah, maybe just the risk of those votes going public could be enough, theoretically, to keep them honest. Just my thoughts. But actually, I wanted to talk about something else, which Quasar said, the 2 billion additional ADA to vote from IOG. I mean, I feel like that doesn't make much sense, because we want quality votes, not quantity votes. And anyway, wouldn't we want to go into a direction where there is one identity has one vote? Oh, that's my question.
That may be a parallel experiment. The way the paper
Exactly
is clearly plutocratic. It's like they say we're going to vote based on how much ADA you hold, and that's how they built it out.
If I may respond to that, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Nori. There, it's easy to say that it's plutocratic. It's also easy to ignore that it's a proof of stake blockchain. So the Cardano protocol, the governance of the core protocol is proof of stake. So the more ADA you have, the more you have stake. We're just assuming that Project Catalyst has to be that way, that it has to be proof of stake, even though the papers show Catalyst is actually proof of work. So is it plutocratic? We're taking a legacy, old world term form of anocracy and applying it to something that we don't quite yet know or are familiar with, and we're building, and we're already applying that plutocracy term on it because it feels good to say. And I'll go a step further and say it's not even plutocratic. I look at it as being a kleptocracy, because these whales are voting and they're stealing voting rewards. So, I mean, how horrible do you want us to make? Do we want to make this sound? Ultimately, yeah, it mimics that, but just call it a plutocracy. Let's remember, we're not yet a government. We're not yet a nation state. And
I like that you added a yet there.
Yeah. Oh, and I mean, I think that's what we're looking, we're working for. And if let's just say we are a nation state, it'll be made up of, a lot of little communities and towns and taverns and digital, hives and things. So, the Cardano protocol is being built to support all of that. I think we're bringing the what we want it to be onto the main layer 1 protocol, and it's not where it belongs. It belongs on, this layer 2 or things that are being built on it. And yeah, Catalyst does not have to be the same. And I feel like we need to do a better job of spreading that message so everybody can back up off the edge, spray them in the face with a squirt gun like you do cats and say, hey, don't go protest or protest. Protest is a fundamental. It's a requirement for a healthy democracy. But keep in mind the reality of what we're protesting or why.
Right. Stein, you have your hand up.
Want to touch on that topic. Like, that's why I said we need different type of voting methods. So, for example, in social impacts type of votes, why don't we make it 1 vote per person and try out that? Whales are not evil people. We know our favorite whale on the Twitter. Mm-hmm. For some types of votes, like that really affects the whole system and the whole economy of the system, I think it needs to be still, and this is the topic of suffrage, like who will be able to participate in what type of vote and with what type of voting power. In some types of economy for the whole system, then yes, it should matter that it's a plutocracy. And that's not a bad thing for those things. We have to keep in mind, what are we? And when it comes to like decision makings as a community, maybe other type of voting methods is better for those. Again, my son is very eager for me to finish, so I will cut it there.
All right. Thank you. And I'm actually out of time as well, and I don't want the video recording to go too long for those that are watching on YouTube. So yeah, thanks everybody for your participation and thoughts on this very important topic. And just as a reminder, we do have a Discord channel, so you can join that and join the conversation offline. This Miro board is available if you want to take notes or continue to drop links. And then next month, we're going to jump into book number 2, which is The Power of Experiments by Michael Luca and Max Baserman. But yeah, thank you everybody for your participation and joining us today for the book club.
Thanks for hosting, Nori.
Yep, my
and
pleasure.
Thanks for being everyone else. Good to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you all. All right.
Yeah, thanks. Goodbye, everyone.